Well, good morning and welcome to Monday Bible Study. Over the last couple of weeks, we have watched David rise to power as king over Israel. We have also seen over the last 2 weeks David's disruption in his private life that has overflowed into his public life. We witnessed David engaging in behavior that kings were not supposed to engage in, trying to cover that up. And it all leads to Nathan coming and giving a parable, and the reality is David's in the wrong. And there will be judgment on David because of it. It's not just the loss of the child that he had with Bathsheba, but also a warning to David that his house is going to crumble. So time goes on. We see David's family not living up to very good standards either. The oldest son rapes his half-sister, and 2 years later, the sister's full brother, Absalom, kills. And David doesn't do anything about it. That's why this leads to it. Absalom is sent away. He's far away. He's in hiding. David mopes around the court and the castle for a couple of years. And finally, Jodabab says, bring him back. You need to bring him back. He does it by telling another parable, another story. David sees within himself that he needs to forgive and to bring the son back without punishment. Son comes back and he won't see him. He won't talk to him. And a couple of years go by where Absalom is living in Jerusalem but never is in the presence of his father. And it finally gets to the point where he wants it needs to happen. They come together, there's forgiveness. But after that, it seems to be Absalom begins to change his perspective, and he begins to see that he wants to be king. And that's where we pick up today in verse 25 of chapter 14 of 2 Samuel. So as we read today, we're going to see several things happen. We're going to see Absalom becoming more and more of a sense of he should be king. We're also going to see David has slipped in his kingship. But when something happens, will he return to be the David he used to be, or will he continue to be the David he is? And what we'll see is David rises to the occasion. Verse 25 of chapter 14 of 2 Samuel. Now in all Israel there was no one to be praised so much for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. When he cut the hair of his head at the end of every year, as he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair on his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So we're depicted Absalom as a beautiful, handsome man. Who else in the narrative of Samuel has been depicted as a beautiful, handsome man? That was in Judges. King Saul. Saul was depicted as handsome and beautiful, and he looked like a king. You know, David grew up in a shepherd's household. He's always had, the odds against him. But Absalom's grown up, maybe with a kind of a mentality, I should be king. And that which gives us kind of awareness as we read the story. Maybe his killing of his brother was less about the rape of Tamar and more about his own sense of, I want to get up on the line. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming to the king's presence. So we go back to our story last week. Then Absalom sent for Joab, send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him a second time. So by the end of 14, Then Joab went to the king, told him. He summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and prostrated himself with his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So after this, Absalom starts to make a change for himself. He's now in the good graces of his father. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses, 50 men to run ahead of him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the road into the gate. So we see that Absalom starts to live like a prince. He'd been kind of in the shadows. Now he goes out, he buys a great chariot and horses, and 50 men run ahead of him. Now, this isn't a large city. The city of David, this Jerusalem, is very small. So essentially, it looks like Absalom's having a little parade for himself every day. He's getting what? Attention. Does he want attention? Yeah. Does he want to look like a king? Yeah. So he starts acting like he's the king. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the road into the gate. So one of the customs in the ancient world were kings were supposed to be arbiters of justice. If people in the kingdom had a problem and there was nowhere else to go, they would come to the king. The king essentially comes and stands in, as with the judges, to judge for the people what is right and wrong. So people were bringing suit before the king for judgment. And Absalom, as he stands at the gate, would call out and say, "From what city are you?" And when the person said, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no one deputed by the king to hear you." Absalom said, "Moreover, if only I were judge in the land, then all who had a suit or a case might come to me, and I would give them justice." So he stands at the city gate as people are coming into the city. Where are you from? Oh, okay. Did you come here for justice? Well, you're not going to get it. For right or wrong, we're not really told a whole lot, but David may not be doing some of David's job. And just like, there's an incumbent in office and you got somebody that's trying to be elected to replace that person, you don't talk about all the good things they do. You talk about the 1 or 2 things that they're not doing. Well, Absalom's a good politician. He's running against his father in a run he's not supposed to be running. Whenever people came near to do obstinance to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of them and kiss them. He likes people to treat him as though he's the king. Thus Absalom did to every Israelite who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel. Listen, the king might not be doing his job, but if I were king, I'd do it better. At the end of 4 years, so it's been 4 years of him doing this. His parades, his telling people they're not going to get what they want if they come to David. So you imagine how much this is circulated in and among the tribes of Israel. I mean, if you did it once or twice, probably not going to be in effect. You do it for 4 years, it has an effect. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow that I made to the Lord." I want you to notice, he's going to tell his dad, "I need to go worship God at the very place where you in Judah were anointed king." He uses worship as a guise for politics. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow that I have made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow while I lived in Geshur in Aram. And the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem. Then I will worship the Lord in Hebron." Part of the question would be, it's been essentially 6 years. What's your motivation to go now? One thing we'll see with David, David is very trusting of his family. Maybe to a fault. The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he got up and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then shout, Absalom has become king at Hebron. He's going to Hebron to make himself king. 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They were invited guests, and they went in their innocence, knowing nothing of this matter. So there are people that are invited to go that don't know what's going to happen. They are really innocent. When Absalom was offering the sacrifice, he sent for, Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilhoi. The conspiracy grew in strength, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So this conspiracy to essentially have a coup begins to grow. Not only that, Absalom has brought people from Jerusalem that aren't aware of what's going to happen. And here's the thing, if you're with somebody when they state they're having a coup, you're automatically going to be what? A part of it. You're put in a tricky situation. So he's got people that are there to support him in his coup. He's already tricked people into being a part of the coup as well. A messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the Israelites have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him at Jerusalem, get up, let us flee, or there will be no escape from us from Absalom. David doesn't say we're going to fight him. Doesn't say we're going to take a stand right here, right now. He says, let's get up and let's flee. Hurry, or he will soon overtake us and bring disaster upon us and attack the city with the edge of the sword. The king's officials said to the king, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord king decides. So the king left, followed by all his household, except 10 concubines who he left behind to look after the house. So make a note. Go back in your memory. What was one of the things that Nathan said was going to happen to David when his house falls? That his wives were going to be raped. In the street, in public. Take note. 10 concubines left, whom he left behind to take after the house. The king left, followed by all the people, and they stopped at the last house. All his officials passed by them, and all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites and all the 600 Gittites who followed him from Gath passed on before the king. So David leaves Jerusalem. He leaves his throne. And he flees because he knows this isn't maybe the moment to fight his son. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you also coming along with us? So there are people that are following David that aren't all Israelites, which is important to note. Israel, the people of Israel, the tribes seem to be against him, but his followers are not just Israelites who have stayed with him, but also some outsiders, which is an interesting note. Just kind of take note of that. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you also coming with us? Go back, stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and I today make you a wander about with us while I go wherever I can? Go back, take your kinsfolk with you. May the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. He tells an outsider, you don't have this isn't your fight. You came with your family to Jerusalem just yesterday. Why would you come along with me? But Ittai answered the king, as the Lord lives and my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether for death or for life, there also your servant will be. A foreigner stays with a Jewish king. Who does that sound like? A foreigner staying with somebody that's not a part of them. Yeah. There's a little bit of an echo of the story of Ruth here, and if you remember, where does David's lineage come from? That story. What we'll also know is that David will have 3 commanders of his army, and one of them will be him. Because he's shown faithfulness to David, while David's own son shows unfaithfulness. An outsider shows more faithfulness to David in this moment than what we'll see is not only his son, but some of his closest advisors. So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all of his men and all the little ones who were with him, and the whole country wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king crossed the Wadi Kidron, and all the people moved on towards the wilderness. There's mourning that's happening because of a loss of a king. Remember when Saul died? Even David, weeps. There's this awareness is that this thing that's happening, whether for good or bad, is mournful. And David himself will mourn in a minute. Now Abithar came up, and Zadok also with the Levites, carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. So David has carried the Ark with him into battle many, many times. But who has he battled? Enemies. Part of the question is, do you use the Ark to fight your own people? Do you use God as a weapon against your own people? So the priests that are loyal to him bring the ark. They set down the ark of God until the people had passed out of the city. And the king said to Zadok, "Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and the place where it stays. But if he says, I take no pleasure in you, here I am, let him do with me what seems good to him." So David essentially says, I will not use God for my own purposes. Take the ark back, and if God wills me to come back home, I'll come back home, and if not, I won't. We're starting to see the old David come back here. David shows kindness to an outsider. David doesn't use God as a weapon. David is starting to come back to his old self. You know, sometimes it takes an event in our lives to shake us back into life. And it appears that this is an event that David needs to shake him up to be the person God had called him to be. He still has repercussions from it, but he starts to become the old David that we and Israel fell in love with. The king also said to the priest, "Look, go back to the city in peace, you and Abithar and your 2 sons, Amahaz your son and Jonathan son of Abithar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abithar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. What we're going to notice is David's going to send some people back to essentially be spies. He's going to use espionage on their behalf. So he says, go back to Jerusalem. Act like everything's okay. You got 2 sons. When you get word about what's going on, you send your 2 sons to me. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, his head covered and walking barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went. David is taking the form of lamentation. Think about all of those Psalms that David has written. Psalms of lament, here's one of them. We can go back to some of David's Psalms of lament and say, maybe this was when he lamented. We'll also have some of the Psalms where David feels encircled or beaten down by his enemies. He's been betrayed by people. Go back to the Psalms, you'll see David expressing those kind of things. David was told that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom. So he hears that one of his most trusted advisors is now working for essentially the enemy, his son. And David said, "O Lord, I pray you turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." This person who is so wise, who has counseled me on so many occasions, whatever comes out of his mouth, pray is foolishness. Now, one of the things we'll see, David sends the ark back, but he also sends back spies. David prays, but he also enact things in life that will help accomplish these things. Unlike Saul, who couldn't make a good decision, David both invokes God to be a part of the decision making, but also doesn't wait for God to tell him exactly what to do. He goes ahead and does things for his own benefit and the benefit of Israel. When David came to the summit where God was worshipped, Hoshi and Archak, I don't know how to say their names, came to meet with him with his coat torn and earth on his head. He'd been putting dirt all over himself. David said to them, "If you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant in times past, so now I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in times past, now I will be your servant. I want you to go and tell him that you have switched sides." It's a risky maneuver. "So now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the council of Ahithophel. The priest Zadok and Abiathar will be with you there. So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, and their 2 sons are with them there. And by them you shall report to me everything you hear." So Hoshea, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So just as Absalom is coming into a city that now opens its gates to him, David's friends sneak back into the city like they've not left. And they're going to tell Absalom, "We're here for you. We're here for you." Now we go back and we stay with David for a little bit. And we see as David is moving beyond Jerusalem, people encountering David and how David encounters them. So far we've encountered an outsider, we've encountered priests, we've encountered friends. So a couple more that we encounter, a couple that we have met before. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met with him. Remember Mephibosheth? He was Jonathan's son, lame in foot. David remembered his promises to Jonathan about making sure that their house didn't die out. And he tells Ziba, "Ziba, do you know of anybody?" "Yes, I do." And Ziba had been taking care of the land. And Mephibosheth comes and sits with the king and becomes his land now. And we can't really tell how Ziba feels about all this. But Ziba just shows up with a couple of donkeys, saddled, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and 1 skin of wine. He brings what an army might need to eat. The king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, the wine is for those to drink who faint in the wilderness." The king said, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "He remains in Jerusalem." For he said, "Today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom." Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." And Ziba said, "I do obstinate. Let me find favor in your sight, my lord the king." So we get this encounter, and this curious encounter. Ziba, who was under Saul, now under Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, goes out and proclaims to him, "Here's some goods. Where's your master?" He wants to be king too. One of the things we'll see in just a moment is there are other people within the Israel tribes that still support the house of Saul. They've not secretly, they've been discontent. You know, it's like in any kind of politics. There's always a fraction that look backwards past and says that was when it was better. So there are some that still won't. And Ziba says Mephibosheth wants to be king. He still, he still has that dream of it. Now what we'll find later is David will interact with Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth will say, "I asked for him to prepare a donkey so I could go out to meet you, and he left me stranded." David doesn't ask any hard questions here, does he? So we're not really sure if Mephibosheth was lying, Ziba's lying. In court intrigue, it's really hard to tell who's telling the truth. But in that moment, Ziba brings to David what David needs in that moment: food. When the king came to David at Baram, a man of the family of the house of Saul, so somebody who has been part of Saul's house is there. He came out, whose name was Shimei, son of Gera. So Shimei is an interesting character. He's related to Saul. Do you think he's ever liked David? So far we've seen David never had any personal hand in the killing of any of David's adversaries. Saul and Jonathan die. One of his servants kills the commander of Saul's army, but David never really had a hand in it. At least that's from what 1 and 2 Samuel reports. But there are some within Israel would say, no, you had a big hand in it. And Shimei's one of those. He threw stones at David and all the servants of King David. Just think, they're walking through, he's up on a hill, and he's out there throwing stones. What was the guy in Andy Griffith that threw stones? What was his name? Y'all remember? They always come into Mayberry and throw stones. Y'all know who I'm talking about.
That crazy guy.
Crazy guy. Think of that guy.
Yeah.
So he's out throwing stones, and he starts to yell at David. Now all the people and all the warriors were on his right and his left. And Shimei shouted while he cursed, "Out, out, murderer, scoundrel. The Lord has avenged on all of you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of blood." Shimei's out there throwing stones, and he's throwing curses at David. And we would say, what would David do? Which David are we going to find here? The one that killed Uriah, or the one who over and over again before that interaction showed some sort of peace and mercy? Then Abshi, son of Zorah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." But the king said, "What have I done with you, you sons of Zorah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" David said to Abishai and all the servants, "My own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on my distress, and the Lord will repay me with goodness from his cursing of me today." So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, throwing stones and flinging dust at him. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and they were refreshed himself. This man is cursing, and part of David deep down doesn't know if the curse is from God or not. David realizes he's not lived up to his expectations. And the only place he can put any source of hope is in God's hands. David is coming back to being who he used to be. Now we switch over to Absalom in his court. So we have a shift in scene. What's been happening in Jerusalem? Now Absalom and all the Israelites came to Jerusalem. Aphenthal, who was with him. When Hoshea and Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hoshea said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." Now one of the things we'll see Hoshea say is true. Now remember, he's there as a spy for David. He's got to lie about why he's there. But notice what he doesn't say. Long live Absalom the king. He says, long live the king. Long live the king. Absalom said to Hoshea, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hoshea said to Absalom, "No, but the one whom the Lord and his people and all the Israelites have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain." Notice he does not specify who. Absalom. He still was going to remain with David. He's still going to. So there's some humor in the story. You've got a spy who says things that Absalom's probably taking in and thinking, "Oh, this is great. I love this," when he's really speaking about David. Moreover, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? Just as I have served your father, so I will serve you. Then Absalom turns his attention to Ahithophel, who was one of David's primary counselors. Give us your counsel. What should we do? This is the very reason they have come to help make his counsel foolishness. Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, the ones he has left to look after the house, and all Israel will hear that you made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. One of the things for us, this is a hard story to read because it is another rape story. But the concubines in David's time were viewed as his property. They were his wives. They were his. They were the king's prerogative. And he says, if you go and you take what is the king's, you are essentially telling the people, what was his is mine. I'm now the king. And what more public way to do that? So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, the very place that David sees Bathsheba. The very place David begins his doing the same thing that is being done to him, taking another man's. It's also the very same thing that Nathan said would happen. So Absalom pitched a tent upon the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the oracle of God. So all the counsel of Ahithophel was esteemed both by David and by Absalom. He is so good at giving wise counsel, it is almost as though they had went to a temple where some other god was, and you got a word from the gods. It was on point. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose. So Absalom's, without even being asked, what should I do next? Ahithophel is going to tell Absalom what he needs to do in this moment to secure the kingdom. And if you do it, you'll do it in such a way that the kingdom will not fall. It will be united under you. And as we read this, we're going to say to ourselves, this would have worked. It's good counsel. Let me choose 12,000 men. I will set out and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged. I will throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. This advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. The best course of action is just to kill your father. If you make this a war, and there are deaths of other Israelites out there, it's going to be hard to bring peace back to the kingdom. But strategically, I can go out and I can get him for you. I mean, it'd be like today, we could have a huge battle, or we could send one missile or one, and just have the person out of the way. Everybody thinks that's a pretty good idea. He's tired, he's weary, don't let him recoup. Just get him while he's down. Then Absalom said, call Hoshea, and let us hear too what he says. When Hoshea came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, this is what Ahithophel has said. Shall we do as he advises? If not, tell us. Then Hoshea said to Absalom, this time the counsel of Ahithophel has given is not good. Now we know that he's supposed to be there to give opposite counsel. He probably knows that's not true. That is a good plan, but that will not serve David. I've got to get an alternative plan that's going to stop them from racing after David in this moment. Then Hushai said to Absalom, the time the counsel has given is not good. He continued, you know that your father and his men are warriors. I want you to listen. As he talks about David, he praises David in front of Absalom, the person that wants him dead. That's how good of a friend he is and how he can't lie. You know that your father and his men are warriors and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. It's not true. He's with the troops. Just like, you find somebody hiding during, battle or siege, usually the leader. Where did they find Saddam Hussein? He was stuck under, people hide. And when some of the troops fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, there's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. If you go and your troops are defeated, it's going to drop your morale like nothing. Then even the valiant warrior whose heart is like a heart of lion will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a warrior, and those who are with him are valiant warriors. But my counsel that all Israel be gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand of the sea for the multitude, and then you should go into battle in person. Essentially, you need to take your time, gather all the people up. What does that do for David? It gives David time. Something he needs. So we shall come upon him in whatever place he may be found, and we shall light on him as the dew falls on the ground. He will not survive, nor will any of those with him. If he withdraws into his city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord has ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so the Lord might bring ruin on Absalom. So the one man whose advice has always been gold, after hearing Hushai tell everybody looks and says, that's a better plan. Because all of a sudden they went from not being afraid to David to being afraid of David again. They had the perfect plan, but that perfect plan was a sense that there's nothing to be feared of. But Hushai comes in and says, you going to poke a bear? Don't do it. You need a bigger troops. You need lots more people. Just wait. Then Hushai said to the priests of Zadok and Abiathar, Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus so I've counseled. Therefore send quickly and tell David, do not lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness. By all means cross over, otherwise the king and all the people who are with you may be swallowed up. The reality is, maybe Absalom's going to do one or the other. But whatever, you need to be on the move. Jonathan and Ahaz were waiting at Engerall. A servant girl used to go and to tell them, and they would go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a boy saw them and told Absalom, so both of them went away quickly and came to the house of the man of Bahurim, who had a well in a courtyard, and they went down into it. And the man's wife took a covering, stretched it over the well's mouth, and spread out grain on it, and nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they have crossed over the brook of water. And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. So Hushai sends these two sons of the priest to go what? Go tell David. On their way, they're spotted and they have to hide. They hide in a well, and over top is covered. And a woman who doesn't have to necessarily protects them. We'll read these stories, there's a lot of action here. If it was in a movie, if it was in a book, there's drama. Can you imagine sitting around the fire and retelling these stories over and over again? Just like certain history movies or history books or certain things we like, as they tell these stories, there's enough in the stories that everybody's engaged to hear and to recognize what we have done in that situation. Would we have been hid? We also see how God's hand, although not directly out and about in the story, is always there working. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. And David said, "Go and cross the water quickly, for thus and so has Abiathar counseled against you." So David and all the people who were there with him sent out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had crossed the Jordan. When Absalom saw that his counsel was not followed, I want you to remember, Abiathar's counsel is not only for Absalom, but for himself. If King David is dead, then the one I have betrayed cannot come back after me. His goal was for Absalom, but also for himself. He has betrayed the most powerful person in Israel, King David. He also knows that if King David lives, King David may come back. And it's not going to be good for him. He is the betrayer of God's anointed one. What does he do? He saddled his donkey and went off to his own city. He set his house in order, and he hanged himself. He died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Does that remind you of another person in the New Testament?
Yes.
Yeah. Someone who has betrayed what? The anointed one of God, realizes what they've done, and he hangs himself. Then David came to Mahanaim, where Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. And Absalom had set Amishai over the army in the place of Joab. And Amishai was son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, daughter of Nashra, sister of Zerah, Joab's mother. And the Israelites and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shelby Shun, I'm glad y'all don't have to read this on Sunday. So and so forth and so on and so on. Brought beds, basins, earthen vessels, wheat, barley, meal, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey, curd, sheep, and cheese from the herd, for David and for the people to eat. For they said, the troops are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So as Absalom is gathering his troops, there are people coming from everywhere to support David with what he needs in that moment. Nourishment. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set them over the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David divided the army into 3 groups, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under command of Abishai, son of Zerah, and Joab's brother, and 1/3 over the command of Ittai the Gittite. This person that just joined the group. David has seen in him faithfulness and puts him in charge of part of the army. And the king said to them, I myself will go out with you. But the men said, you shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us, but you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore it is better that you send us help from the city. And the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders concerning Absalom. David still loves his son. So the army went out in the field of Israel. The battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the slaughter there was great on that day, 20,000 men. And the battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest claimed more victims that day than the sword. Why would the forest claim it? It's being burnt up. And Absalom happened to meet with the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak. His head was caught fast in the oak, and he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. So Absalom is being defeated. As he's probably trying to leave the battle, his body gets caught in a tree. A man saw it and told Joab, "I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." Joab said to the man who told him, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt." But the man said to Joab, "Even if I felt my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not rise my hand against the king's son. For in hearing the king's commanded you, Abishai and Ittai, saying, 'For my sake, protect the young man Absalom.'" Now remember, Joab's the one who got Absalom and David back together. He's watched the king become less and less of a king because of his relationship with Absalom. You think he really wants Absalom still around? No. "For my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof." Joab said, "I will not waste time like this with you." He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them in the heart of Absalom, while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Joab essentially says, "I don't want to engage in this nonsense. Let's put an end to this right here, right now." And he does. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the troops. They took Absalom, threw him into a great pit in the forest, raised over him a great heap of stones. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken and set up for himself a pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no son to keep my name in remembrance." He called the pillar by his own name. It's called Absalom's monument to this day. Then Amazaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and carry tidings to the king, that the Lord has delivered him from the power of his enemies." Joab said to him, "You are not to carry tidings today. But today you shall not do so, because the king's son is dead." Listen, don't tell him. Now this is one of the men who had been in Jerusalem carrying orders, secrets back to David. Don't go. Then Joab said to Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Amaziah, son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "Come what may, let me also run after the Cushite." And Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, seeing that you have no reward for the tidings?" "Come what may," he said, "I will run." So he said to him, "Run." Then Amaziah ran by the way of plan and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates. The sentinel went up to the roof of the gate by the wall, and he looked up and saw a man running alone. The sentinel shouted and told the king. The king said, "If he is alone, there are tidings in his mouth." He kept coming and drew near. Then the sentinel saw another man running. The sentinel called to the gatekeeper and said, "See, another man is running alone." The king said, "He is also bringing tidings." The sentinel said, "I think the running of the first one is like the running of Amazaz of Zadok." And the king said, "He is a good man and comes with good tidings." Then Amazaz cried to the king, "All is well." He prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up men who raised their hands against my lord the king." The king said, "It is well with the young man Absalom." And Amazaz answered, "When Joab your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it is." And the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood there. Joab didn't want David to know on that day that he killed his son. Then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "Good tidings. For the Lord has vindicated to you, delivering from your power of all those who rose against you. Is it well with the young man Absalom? The Cushite answered, May the enemies of my Lord and all who rise up to do you harm be like the young man. And the king was deeply moved and went to the upper chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, O my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son Absalom. We'll stop there today. If you continue to read, you're going to see Joab gets really ticked off with David. Imagine the person who has tried to destroy the kingdom, and all the men who have tried to protect the kingdom, some of them have died. And Joab sees David again putting Absalom in front of everybody else, even in his mourning. One of the things we see through these chapters, and we'll see some of the people that interacted with David during this time have to come back to David to ask for forgiveness. Mephibosheth's going to come back. Remember Shimei throwing stones and curses will come back to David. And the ways that David reacts to them shows us that David's coming back to form. He's coming back to himself. And we'll finish, hopefully next week, the rest of 2 Samuel. Let us pray. Oh, go ahead.
No, but you said next week, but that's Memorial Day.
No, we got one more week, then Memorial Day.
Okay, we got.
And then, we got next week. We'll take off Memorial Day, and then for those that are in person, we'll have a meal together, and then after that, we'll take a summer break. So, well, let's pray. Gracious God, we just thank you for today. We thank you for your love and for your care. God, we ask that as we have listened to these stories that are hard to listen to, sometimes they're engaging because they are full of intrigue. But Lord, in the midst of it were men and women who suffered. And oftentimes in our world, we too suffer because of different political factions. God, we see that in other countries as wars rage. And God, we even see it sometimes in our own lives as politics can sometimes fracture families. Lord, we pray that as we serve the risen King Jesus, that we will be as peacemakers. That we can live in a world that is often divided and say, how can we bridge the divide? How can we love our neighbor? How can we be a people of forgiveness and mercy and grace? Oftentimes David modeled those qualities, and oftentimes he didn't. But we have a one true King that always is faithful, always is good, always is loving and merciful, abounding in steadfast love. And for that we give you praise. Help us, Lord, to be your people, to come back next week as we finish the story of David. And Lord, take the story of David and take it into our lives and see where we need to see the world in similar ways. How you're working in ways that we can't see, and how you're raising up people that are for you, and how we can be supportive. We pray all of this in Christ's name. Amen.